Chris, do you have a specific situations, conditions that you are more worried about in your growing conditions in Michigan? What of all these disorders that we've been talking about, which are the ones that are more concerning and how you manage those?
It's interesting, Bria. That's a great question. I know Phil's been doing a lot of work. Phil Schroeder's been doing a lot of work with retain, and we've looked at a full rates of retain, 1 pouch, 2 pouches. And 2 years ago, we did run a 2 pouch rate 4 weeks before harvest with 1 pouch, and then came back in 2 weeks before harvest with a 2nd pouch. And we did see some of this injury, and maybe we had too high a rates of retain. So when you look at your whole harvest window, we have a lot of varieties that we have to pick at that time. We've got Galas, McIntosh, Honeycrisp. So we have to figure out how do we use some of these tools, harvest management tools. And I think we have to have a plan, and maybe we can lean on some of the varieties like Galas or maybe McIntosh. And we definitely can maybe use less of these tools like retain or Vista on Honeycrisp. It always seems like we got a lot of apples to harvest at that time. I think I think we have to look at, I think we have to develop a plan, and we have to look at each variety and decide, you know, what's our harvest date going to be, what kind of rates are we going to use. You know, we got to look at, you know, what's the strain of that variety? Is it a high coloring variety? Can we use high rates of retain to help push that variety out so we can harvest Honeycrisp? What's our crop load at that time? Do we have a heavy crop load, a little bit lighter crop load? Those are definitely factors that MCP or retain will respond a little bit differently to. But we have used retain on honeys. We've had some great success 3-4 years ago with it. We actually have a grower that used quite a bit of retain in my area, and used a lot of retain, and he grows a lot of Honeycrisp. And that year we didn't see much injury, but 2 years ago we did. So it seems to be very variable depending on the year. So,
Phil, maybe you would like to add to Chris' comments and share some of the results of those trials?
I agree with Chris. I think he stated it pretty well. We got a lot of apples to harvest. We got to have harvest management tools. For a long time, I've been doing high rates of retain, 1 and 2 pouches, like Chris mentioned. And I had not seen the storage problems that Chris mentioned or that Chris Watkins mentioned, but I didn't store them very long. I stored them only maybe 60 days, maybe 90 at the most. Is there a time limit? When should we be on those high risk blocks? Should we be selling them by 90 days? I thought it worked really well. 1 year that we did this, 1 and 2 pouch rate, we saw just absolutely gorgeous Honeycrisp. But now Chris has scared me, so Chris Watkins, sorry, Chris, that scared me. So now I've got to look at this again. We do that to stretch out our harvest. And Chris mentioned Gala we could use to stretch out, but Gala gets shoulder browning. And so we got a problem there too. What's your thoughts?
Although the difference, Phil, with shoulder browning is it is greatly inhibited by retain or Vista.
It is inhibited?
Yep.
Good.
Bruce.
I had a question, if that's okay, but about this, and it has to do with the length of time. So Chris, to put you on the spot once again, it seems to me that, well, you've done quite a bit of work on long-term storage at low temperatures for chilling injury inspections. And it seems to me that chilling injury takes a while to develop in some years. So it can be 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you begin to see, you know, some of the symptoms of chilling injury. Is that kind of true? So we might get by Phil's 90-day window, but after that, maybe not.
So that's a good question because it comes under the not always answer. So, but if you're going to ask me sort of as a run of the mill, what I would be confident about normally, but not every year. Here's my answer. When we do the dynamics of bitter pit development and soft skull development, we find typically it's about 2 months before soft skull develops without at chilling temperature. So the bitter pit is quick and the soft skull is, and so we're looking at that dynamic to think about how we can manage it. But then we have a colleague like Jennifer Diel that tells us that you can get soft skull on the tree. In fact, you may have even told me that, I'm not sure. But that scares the crap out of me, right? So again, it's this weird apple that some years you can do anything to it, break every Honeycrisp rule, and it will be a happy camper. And then another year, you just look at it a little bit out of the corner of your eye and it falls to pieces.
I agree, Chris. I've seen soft skull on the tree before picking. And it was I thought it was associated with being a little bit overripe, but I don't ever look cross-eyed at my Honeycrisp.
Yeah, I've seen that in Western New York. I've had 2 different growers bring in samples to me that had soft scald, even soggy breakdown on the tree. And I think it's more associated with cool, wet weather. I'm not sure about the maturity. But Chris, back to the bitter pit and, not marketing right away. So within 30 days, you should see all the bitter pit you're going to see in storage, 30 to 45 days.
30 days. So, you know, so I feel very passionate about maintaining the reputation of Honeycrisp. So when people say, oh, I have a high bitter pit block, I'm going to put it out in the market. Internally, I want to have a fit.
Right.
Yes. I want you to condition that fruit and hold it for at least 3 or 4 weeks, then grade it. Because the other thing that neither Angie nor I touched on, there are 2 types of disorders. They're what we call progressive disorders, which are going to continue to develop during storage. So you see 10% today, you'll see 30% tomorrow, and so on. Bitter pit is not progressive. So within a week, within a month, all the bitter pit you're going to see is essentially has been expressed. So you can put out in the marketplace and you don't have to worry about it developing more. That's a very, very important difference in terms of being able to market the fruit.
Chris?
Yes, Bruce.
So, to throw mud in your face, it is a common experience as a packer that we'll have a lot that we're sorting, 5, and this is not just Honeycrisp, this is other varieties as well. Maybe we're throwing out 3, 4, 5% for bitter pit, and this could have been packed in October, November, December, January, regular air out of CA, but we pack it, and a week later, our shipping QC people are saying, hey, we're seeing more expression of bitter pit.
For Honeycrisp?
A lot of varieties.
No. You can take your mug back, because unless you can tell me it's for Honeycrisp, because I would agree with you, for any other apple variety, I won't say what I just said.
Okay. So you're saying Honeycrisp is unique in that respect.
Of course, it's unique.
Yeah, and with bitter pit susceptibility. I mean, you don't have too many varieties that are so susceptible to bitter pit. You see it in Cortland, right? You see it in Red Delicious once in a while, but far and away, Honeycrisp, has a glass half empty when it comes to that.
I mean, my career was built originally on Cox's Irish Pippin from New Zealand, which is a wonderful apple if you love bitter pit. And the growers pack those fruit, they look beautiful, and they can come out in Europe 80%. I mean, you've just wasted thousands of dollars shipping. But that's Cox's.
So that's unique to Honeycrisp, that the expression is essentially,
I think,
fully expressed within 30 to 40 days.
I think so, but again, I have to be humble, Bruce. Number one, the more years I've worked in this business, the less confident I am of anything that I say. And then you have to take in the regional effects. And So I don't pretend to really understand a Honeycrisp growing in Washington. So I will reserve my declaration of confidence relatively to New York.
Okay, okay. I'm gonna go talk to my shipping QC people.
So Bruce, coming back to you in that question, have you evaluated or tried PGRs or pre-harvest methods for reducing bitter pit in storage? And if you have had any success in those treatments?
Okay, so we are big users of Harvista. We've backed off a little bit, but I think, let me go back to what we're trying to do now is to look at our harvest labor, look at all the varieties we have to harvest, lay out a template of what we think the actual ideal harvest time frame is for each apple, each variety, what volume of fruit we need to pick. And then we are targeting blocks and varieties to pick by rate or by multiple applications based upon trying to achieve, in an ideal world, ideal maturity in each and every variety we're picking, but in the real world, at least acceptable maturity across all the fruit we're harvesting, whether it's Honeycrisp integrates into our, it's the main variety we're picking in September through early October. But we're looking at how we use plant growth regulators, whether it's Harvista, Retain, or multiple applications to Harvista, or even the initial timing. Is it 2 weeks before? Is it a week before? Do we do a first pick and then put some Harvista on? I'm not sure if I should say this. I mean, now that you have ground application equipment, you have the ability to do half rates or 2/3 rates with Harvista. I mean, so you have a lot of different wrench sizes in the toolbox. And I think it's very important that you decide which ones best fit your program, but you have to look at it holistically across not just Honeycrisp, but across all your varieties. I mean, you can put it on all your Honeycrisp because you say, and I'm convinced that it does, the fact that the fruit's slightly firmer does give you a cleaner picking job, okay? But if you backed up your whole harvest, you really didn't, you moved your problem, you didn't necessarily solve it. So the integration of these post-harvest or PGRs really needs to be looked across your entire apple farming operation. And then you also need to incorporate into that how you look at it, the use of the post-harvest. What are you going to put in CA? What are you going to put in regular air? Are you going to MCP it? Are you going to put DPA? What's your ability to, how good is your CA equipment, your CAing equipment? You have the ability to maintain, 0.6 CO2 levels. All these things have a big influence in terms of your ability to most effectively manage and deliver to the consumer a good eating product. So we use, it's not uncommon for us to use a full rate of Harvista. We have actually occasionally used a double rate of Harvista, MCP'd the fruit on top of that, stuck it in a CA room with Harvest Watch. So we're running, we run a lot of Honeycrisp down at 0.5, but we've got the equipment where we think we can effectively monitor it. But if we're running 0.502, I'll guarantee you we're not running more than 0.7 CO2.
And Bruce, just to add a little bit more information, in that holistic analysis that you make, do you consider the susceptibility of the block to bitter pit? Do you consider the pre-harvest condition of the fruit before making this decision?
Not very well. I mean, we know the blocks that tend to bitter pit, so we don't store those. We also typically do not pack those and try to just shove the problem down the marketing road, but we do try to get those packed. So the blocks that tend to bitter pit are also the ones that tend to seem to express more of the other storage disorders. So we will try to get those packed before Christmas. But we definitely avoid just, hey, this is the bitter pit block. We picked it yesterday, we're packing it tomorrow, and we're shipping it the day after that. That's
yeah.
Yeah, that was my going to be kind
that
of
may have
following
worked
up.
years ago, but it does not work in today's market.
I just
Okay.
want to jump in and say, you know, I think the interesting thing about Chris's response and now Bruce is what you have is two major growers / storage operators that understand this. This is almost like precision agriculture, that to apply these PGRs and post-harvest treatments, you have to have a very nuanced view of your crop. And you know, I think we have another group of farmers, and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, that just use these things without thinking all this through. So that's why I'm loving hearing what Chris said earlier and what Bruce is saying now. There's a real analytical approach to using these PGRs.
Lee, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up on what you had talked about, Bernadita, about the history of the block. So Bruce, you mentioned you kind of use the history of the block to base some of your decisions off of. Do you use the on year, off year also?
Oh, we're such good growers, we don't have off years. No, we look at crop load, but the reality of it is, even though we have pretty uniform yields in terms of bins per acre, as you measure, even in these quote unquote fairly uniform blocks, we do have the issue that we have trees that are more lightly cropped this year than the previous year. And those trees are always the ones that, if you're going to run 3% bitter pit, I'll bet you 50% of that 3% came from 10% of my trees. We're good enough farmers where we typically see minimal, if no, expression of bitter pit in Honeycrisp on the tree, other than in first or second leaf cropping scenarios where the tree is still relatively vigorous. We may still be trying to achieve that final 10% canopy fill, so we've got the trees pumped up a bit. But you get into our 7th, 8th, 9, 10-year-old blocks, we just do not see bitter pit in the orchard, but we do see a little bit on the packing line. I mean, not a huge amount. I mean, bitter pit is actually on the fruit that we grow ourselves is probably one of our relatively minor issues. We have much bigger issues with seasonal variations and expression of soft scald or internal browning, soggy breakdown, you know, that, and we had a new one this year, the one that you guys are labeling as boron.
I have a comment. First, I'd like to appreciate Randy and Chris for excellent presentation. A comment for Chris, that in our experience, rootstock also makes a difference, a big difference, as far as how much of a bitter pit you can see at harvest versus after harvest. Also, your comment about 2 months, that is very consistent with our observation. We have had different harvests in one of our tests, and then we have been looking at multiple storage lengths. And we are finding that what you find after 2 months maybe just, or, 65 days, then that would be it. So my comment would be like a rootstock, like V1, like V as in Victor, that's a series of rootstock. At harvest, you always have less bitter pit than after storage, but that is not so with Geneva 202, for example. Thank you.
I would throw this comment out just as an observation that, in Washington, obviously we have the ability to control our soil moisture levels for the most part. But I mean, this is something we've learned over the years, that if you have a Honeycrisp block that is kind of sloppy wet, you're going to see bitter pit. So we work very hard at managing soil moisture levels in our Honeycrisp, particularly as you get into the latter half of the season or the last few weeks before harvest, because you do have the chance to kind of dry them out a little bit. I mean, it's better if you can manage it on a season-long approach. You don't necessarily have that every year.
Do any of you guys have experience with using retain, or I guess Harvesta as well, close to harvest, 3 days before harvest, or after the first pick, spray retain? What's your thoughts on that?
Again, it comes back to looking at all of the bins we have to pick from late August through mid-October, and what's our available labor supply. So we may take some blocks and say, and we grow fruit in the Kittitas Valley, which is one of the latest maturing districts in the state of Washington. We will spray those 2 weeks before harvest, 2 weeks before anticipated harvest. And we will sometimes come in and spray a portion of that orchard when you would have initially started harvest, to essentially try to delay those blocks, 3-4 weeks. And that whole purpose is, and then if you went to our very earliest maturing orchards or blocks of Honeycrisp, and we'll simplify the thing, let's just say I'm only a Honeycrisp grower, I would put nothing on my most early maturing blocks because it enables me to, quote unquote, get started. So it's knowing how many bins per day you have to pick to have good fruit quality, and then mapping out a plan where plant growth regulators may be part of the program to enable you to knock the peaks off the mountains to even out your harvest volume of food you have to harvest on a daily basis. And if you need to end up doing multiple applications or double rates to get some fruit to carry you out a week or 2 weeks past when you would normally harvest, if that's what it takes to get the fruit picked at the proper maturity, that's what you should be doing. But you shouldn't be just putting them on because somebody said it's gonna give you firmer fruit. Well, if you pick the fruit at a proper maturity, the fruit is probably pretty nice without a plant growth regulator. But if you can't get it picked, that's a whole different, that's a different ballgame. And what you're trying to do is to get the most uniform fruit quality from the first day of harvest to the last day of harvest.
As Lentisil breakdown, what are the exacerbating factors of that disorder?
That I think we see more lentisil breakdown on more mature fruit, but and maybe if you have a block that was generally picked a bit too mature, and then you're in the mode of hey, this was supposed to be in a CA room, and so it's going to get MCP, and it got this and that. In talking with other packers, I've had anecdotal conversations that where they would suggest that the more post-harvest chemicals you put on, the higher the expression of lentisil breakdown you see. But It's not like we're going to quit using post-harvest chemicals to solve a problem in one lot or 10% of the fruit if the fruit as a whole benefits more. Doesn't really answer the question. It's just.
Carolina, do you wanna
Yeah.
then? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it is increasing with the change of the climate, right? And being more stressful in the field that affects ripening rate on fruit. And we already know that the higher harvest maturity, the more susceptible the fruit becomes. When it goes in, it is pre-sized, and then it is packed, and that's where the disorder manifests. That's when you see those lenticel turning brown. And so there's many, all the packaging procedure that were developed by Gene Kufferman and Eric Curry 12 years ago or 15 years ago, they're still in place. But regardless of that, lenticel issues are going up, breakdown specifically, which appears mostly after fruit has been packed. And I am right now with Faith Kreitzer looking at water makeup in the packing house, dump tank and other water, pre-sizing waters, and what's the makeup of that water and how that affects lenticel breakdown, appearance, expression after the fruit is packed. And so we're taking samples pre and post those those waters in the packing house and after packaging. And because the hypothesis is that the more mineral accumulation in that water, maybe organic molecules and excess of sanitizers, they're going to enhance the lenticel disorder because fruit is already susceptible. So we know that already, that fruit, it's becoming more and more susceptible. And also, just to see if it's, the pre-sizing part of it, is it that serious? And in my experience prior to this project that we have just gone for 1 year, when the water is not changed regularly and not filter, the disorder goes up, amazingly up. And we're seeing some trends already on the data we have this year. Hopefully, we're going to be able to see clear trends and to tell you that when the parts per million of cations or salts in that water is, the threshold is this, then you're going to see an increase on appearance. So that's where we are right now. So.
Are you talking mainly on Gala, Carolina? On Gala?
I'm talking on Gala because that's the one, the most susceptible one, but we've seen it in Fuji's, we see it in Honey's, we see it in Cosmic a little bit. So any variety can have it.
Yeah, I remember in Gene Kupperman, post-harvest person from long ago, when I visited in Washington, I think in 2008, it was just becoming an issue. And he saw it mostly in pre-sort lines. So that led to him believe, wow, there's something in the wash water that's irritating it. So what you said makes sense.
Yeah, and in Chile, I've seen at least one case of a big packing house putting a very expensive filtering system, and the lenticel issues went down significantly. Okay. And that's where, this project came about, because you cannot have very low chlorine, right? Calcium chlorine, or safety, sodium. Yep. Yes, because of food safety. And that's where they're going now, just reducing the amount of chlorine on that water. And really, it's not the chlorine. I mean, it's that's what we believe. That's the hypothesis. And that's where we're, studying, because you can't just 20 parts per million of chlorine is not going to do anything to the pathogens or, the microbes. It's not going to be effective at all. And so why would you put even, that rate of chlorine in the water?
Carolina?
Yeah.
Many years ago, we were working on the same issue on Golden Delicious. And we were looking at that and also russeting. And we had this, I think it was about 6-7 years we studied anytime we had a sudden shift during the growing season, going from cold spring to suddenly warm temperatures, this issue was worse, both russeting and then breakdown. So as you said, it is very complex, but it seems that anytime, and then in that case, whenever we were applying GA, we were assuming that we are increasing the elasticity of the skin, and then the damage was a little less. This was, I think it was ProGip, one of the compounds. So it was reducing a little bit. Just share some of the experience we had.
Yeah, thank you. And that's one thing. The other thing I did long time ago was apply coating in the trees, on the trees, or even sprayed on the bins. And it did work. It did reduce the incidence simulating packaging process afterwards, because you're actually covering those spaces in the cuticle that don't have enough wax cover because of the climate and the dehydration and all the low humidity at the time of harvest, or if you leave the bin sitting on the orchard too long. And so, I don't know, at one point a commercial product was sold, but now I don't think there is any, and it is not a bad practice. Maybe in the future, I don't know, some applications on the rooms would be feasible just to cover that fruit before it's actually placed and run in the packing house or the preciser. But we do know, and it holds, that the more mature the fruit, the more susceptible it becomes. The longer in storage, the more susceptible. And we know that. And if the fruit, actually the heat wave we have right now, it's going to be, if it still stays like this, it's going to be very detrimental to the progression of ripening. It's going to be faster. Growers are going to harvest earlier, but that fruit is already stressed and susceptible to everything that comes after fruit goes on post-harvest. And increasing sun scald and other heat-related disorders and lenticel issues. And so, everything is just escalates as one factor adds to another. And one of the things I've seen on the 2 years I've been working with honeys is that if the orchard, everything is done well in the orchard, so the pre-harvest section of production, it's well taken care of, although it's not easy on honeys, I do know that. But crop load, vigor, everything looks great. I'm working with organic orchards in different environments, climates. The fruit holds beautifully for 9 months in DCA or CA, and then 4 months, 1 more month in RA. My fruit, 2 years, looks really nice. No 1-MCP and no retain or harvesta pre-harvest, just the management of that fruit from the orchard towards the end of the supply chain scenario.
Excellent. Thank you, Carolina. Randy, were you going to add something to that?
I don't know that it's valuable now because Gene Kupperman and Eric Curry's names have been commented on, but one of the slides that I left out of the 65 slides that I did not share with you tonight, thank you, Chris, was a remake of one of Eric Curry and Kupperman slides, but they say there should be a consideration for hot years where they see more of the lenticel breakdown, minimize the storage duration, harvest earlier if possible, not seemingly affected by MCP, pre-sizing in water enhances the problem. And on packing cold fruit into warm water in the packing line also enhanced it for some reason. And then soaps, waxes, detergents. So this is one of those things, they had like 13 different treatments. Soaps, waxes, detergents, all of them enhanced lenticel breakdown. So so just about everything seemed to be affecting it in one way or another. And the one comment that I wanted to make for my own self is that when you add sanitizers to a pool of water, right, the chlorine is taken away. It reacts, it goes away or volatilizes, but the salts don't. So any salts that are on the surface of that fruit just continue to accumulate and accumulate, accumulate, accumulate until eventually you got sodium levels or calcium levels that are way beyond what you really want. And the other thing is that if you have overhead sprinkling or something like that, or you apply fungicides in the fields, those inert materials, which are quote inert, right? They are also made of things like aluminum and other things like that. And that goes into the water too. So it's kind of worth remembering that. And I remember now going back to some work I did on peaches, 1989, I guess. We would look at wash water after each load of peaches went through, and we would find 100-fold difference in the amount of aluminum in that water from one orchard block to another. Just think about that. And aluminum, for those of you who don't know, when you react it with the surface of a peach, turns it purple. Okay, so when you bruise it a little bit, you get that aluminum going inside, it turns it purple. Anyway, that's a peach inking story. But yeah, those materials that are in that water are not necessarily inert. It's just worth remembering that they don't go anywhere mineral state in solution. So exchanging that water would be a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we know that we apply a lot of products here in Washington, including calcium products in pre-harvest. I'm thinking not only for calcium uptake, but also for sunburn protection. So Washington growers do apply a lot of calcium products. And I remember seeing that there is a possibility of having toxicity development in fruit just by high levels of calcium in that packing line. So I appreciate those comments. Yeah.
Yeah, two comments, very short.
Yeah.
For many years, sodium was the one to blame. But it's not really the case. And then there is a lot susceptibility. But we've seen that, I mean, in general, if we want to tell our packers what to look for, it's not over 100 ppm of sodium in that water. And in the fast life of during the packaging season, it's hard to change the water. It's hard to measure the amount of minerals and cations in that water, or salt, right, in that water. And so it just, everything gets, so practicing, being very rigorous on how are we going to clean and change that water and how often is something really, really critical.
In Michigan last year, we had near frost conditions, some frost conditions right at harvest of Honeycrisp. Growers were running their frost fans. Got any thoughts on that? To try to keep the orchard a little warmer near harvest.
Yeah. So did you see soft skull?
No.
In the tree?
I didn't.
We have seen soft skull on the tree when we get like near frost or get a frost, more typically towards the end of harvest. But I've seen that several times.
Do you run the frost fans, Bruce?
We don't have frost fans.
Wind machines?
Well, we use water and.
Okay. What do you think, Randy or Tris?
Well, I did a little bit of work with you this last year, and we found a slight relationship between those blocks that were harvested, let's say the day before and the day after that chilling event, and they seem to be a little bit more, they would develop more chilling injury. That's what I found. But it wasn't in every case, but the tendency was there for them to have a little more chilling injury. So I think
the statement is, but not always.
Yeah, I forgot that part. Yeah, but not always. Yeah, but yeah, we saw that.
So I got a question for you. One question I hear from the field men at our packing shed, and I've heard it a couple of times, a couple of years. And so we see these years where we have a lot of bitter pit. In Michigan, some years we have a lot of bitter pit, some years we don't. So once we see this bitter pit at the packing line, our fieldman or the manager of our packing line has asked, and he thinks possibly some of the bitter pit that we think we're seeing is actually lenticel breakdown. Do you think that maybe at our level, we're getting bitter pit and lenticel breakdown confused, and maybe we got more issues with lenticel breakdown than we do bitter pit some years?
So I think what we are seeing that we call bitter pit is bitter pit, and what we call lenticel breakdown is lenticel breakdown. I think, there's always that. What I tell you before, the older I am, the less I know. But the bottom line is that all those things It seems to me if you have calcium deficient fruit, however you define that, it's going to be expressed somehow. But, you know, I was going to say the other term that people use that I never really heard of until I came to the States was stippen, and stippen as tree pit. And I never use that term, but some growers do. But when you have a lot of stippen, you're probably going to have a lot of bitter pit showing up.
Yes.
A very old terminology.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you all being here, especially to Randy and Chris to join in the last minute for this last session. We absolutely enjoy this process with Mario. I'm speaking on behalf of Mario Miranda from Cornell University and Anna Wallis from Michigan State University, and myself, Bernardita, from Washington State University. We appreciate so much this effort. These meetups has been great for us. And, and thank you for all the attendees to join us throughout all these 4 sessions. We would like to get your feedback in the survey you're going to receive when we finish this webinar, because maybe it will lead us to continue doing this type of work in the future.